Disclaimer. The information and education material contained herein is meant to promote the general understanding and dialogue of GANs processing. Such information is not meant or intended to serve as a substitute for a healthcare professional's clinical training, experience, or judgment. For patients and individuals, such information is not to be a substitute for professional medical, therapeutic, or healthcare advice or counseling. For medical issues or concerns, including decisions about medications and other treatments, readers, viewers, listeners should always consult their physician or, in serious cases, seek immediate assistance from emergency personnel. Prescription information, procedures, and use of medical devices information should be undertaken only by properly trained and certified medical personnel. We specifically disclaim any warranties, express or implied, including implied warranties of merchantability or fitness for a particular purpose. Such information is provided, as is, and is believed to be accurate at the time of its publishing, but it is the viewer's job to evaluate the accuracy of any information found in this presentation. Every case presented is of their own experience, applied by themselves for themselves, and it applies to their case only. Every person experiencing health problems should seek professional medical advice and consult their course of treatment with a doctor. The processes of plasma balancing described herein are a natural process which supports the body but does not replace medical advice or therapies one is already subject to.
Thank you very much, everybody, for being here today. We are setting up the screen. How's it looking?
It looks perfect. You just made that little adjustment and we lost the side view, but we have the full face on view. Keshe American Knowledge Team 2024.
And thank you very much. And this is the last one in the year 2024. They're all going to be committed to the archive. So please enjoy them in the future, as we're talking to you in the past. And I want to welcome everybody in this beautiful Sunday afternoon. Please understand this is a very important meeting because it follows up the Knowledge Seekers workshops that we've been doing every week, and the Brazilian community, which is really pushing hard. And we see a lot of challenges for the new year. And so we are also represented from many areas around the world, different continents, and this is most welcome. It's what makes this meeting so powerful. So I hope you enjoy the sessions. This is the Keshe Foundation Spaceship Institute Teachings on Plasma Science. We are embarking on a new course. We are starting with a basic inertia, and we will be talking about a ratio. My name is Alexander, and from Canada is December 29th, 2024. And this is part of the Keshe Foundation North America Plasma Education Series. We completed last week the Advanced Transmutation Series, and as you can see, it's been ongoing now for 4 years. And color was a very important thing that we wanted to talk about, and we wanted to talk about how we bring things together. And how we bring things together is actually what we're talking about today, is part of the Inertia series. And to understand the Inertia series, it's science that's a little bit different from what we've been brought up to believe, because the basic inertia, as we all understand, is the ability for something to carry on until it is an equal and opposite reaction to balance it or to change the course. And since we are going to be changing the course, we need to know how to change the course. And so let's discuss ratio today and what it means. And we're not going to talk about the golden ratio. Everybody knows what that is, or the Fibonacci ratio. We're going to talk about, how do we get off this hesitancy highway? Because it truly is the lowest energy state. And there's nothing wrong, really, with being at this energy state. It's what's wrong is we don't understand the rules. And, frankly, we were trying to figure out who is in the way and who is in whose way. And this is kind of the challenge that we have in our life because we're constantly searching for outer space. We think we've been there, but we've never been there, not with the current technology. We've only been outside of the Earth space, into that in-between space. But the only time we ever go into outer space with any kind of technology is when we go to sleep. And we don't really understand that because we're too busy in our physical state, driving our vehicles and shifting gears. And this is what we're always doing. The reason for shifting the gears is because we have to change the gear ratios. And we really have to change the ratios now to join the plasma highway to our pie in the sky. And as we say, we're always looking for that little piece of the pie. But frankly, there's a much bigger piece of the pie. And we just have to change our schemes. So it's beyond our little piece of the pie. Our pie that we chose to come to is the earth pie. And this earth pie is broken down into various elements. And these elements, we've come to know them as the periodic table of prejudice, because these are the details of our earth space. And the reason they're prejudicial is because we are not just taking all these elements and blending them into one big soup. You can find them in individual places. For instance, we find copper in South America, oil in the Middle East, and gold in the Far East. Well organized. And we can mine that. But the earth has provided that for us. And we have to question, did the earth provide it for us, or did the earth provide it for itself? Because the earth had to be here before we came here. And so this is what we're trying to discuss here. So in the 3 books of Marantava Kolikesh, book number 1, The Universal Order of Creation of Matter, we see how there's a convergence of different matters, such as the antimatter, dark matter, and the matter state. And we had to come to understand what the matter state is. And then, of course, there's the structure of light. It's interesting that light has a structure. It's also interesting that light moves. And so when it moves, it has to go from one place to another. And so how do we determine that? And are these places the same? Or is there a difference? And is this difference important in understanding the ratio? Because when we look at book number 3, The Origin of the Universe, and we see one field dividing into 2, and clearly these 2 fields are not of the same size. But is there a ratio that we can look at here? Or is there something in our life that will tell us exactly what the parameters are? But clearly we could see that we're getting the short end of the stick, aren't we? Because man's universe is very much smaller than the sister universe. And so this is obviously not to scale, because the sister universe would be beyond the screen that you're looking at, let alone the cover of the book. So we've been trying for 358 weeks to address the situation with respect to world peace. And so Rick Crammond and the Universal Council have been bringing forward the One Nation, One Planet, One Race for Justice and World Peace. Because when you travel, and if you're traveling to another country, you don't say you're from such and such a city, you say you're from a certain country. And if you're traveling to another continent, you may say that you're from another continent. So it only stands to reason that if you're going to another planet, you're going to say that you're from another planet. No one knows, where Florida is when you're talking about the universal community. For instance, not to pick on Florida, it's just. But, so what we look at is the parameters. And the parameters involve rules. There's a range, there's nearness, proximity, things we talked about, energy states, and of course the fundamental magnetical and gravitational field forces. And so when we talk about the rules and the parameters, there are questions that we have to ask, because are the rules and the parameters the same in regards to what we have to take into account? So for instance, we're given rules. We call them the 10 Commandments, rules on how to live. And so there were 10 of them. Now all of a sudden there's 24. So we can see that the ratio of the commandments that we grew up with and the commandments that exist is literally 1 to 2.4, or is it, no, 1 to 1.4. 10 to 24 would be 1 to 2.4. So that's a ratio. And unfortunately, in that ratio, the commandments that we were given, again, was the short end of the stick. So a lot of stuff was missing. And this is one of the reasons we're having trouble getting on the plasma highway. But when we look at the relationship of where this plasma highway is, we're talking about carbon 16 and carbon 8. But where are we? We're in carbon 12. And the thing is, the carbon 12, we have to understand the carbon 12 is amalgamation of two fields, and that's what we're talking about, inertia. And so in this first class discussing that, we're going to say that there are two carbon 12 fields that have created this field. And then, of course, we see that when we go to the transition highway, that there are two other fields, carbon 14 and carbon 10. Well, what we have to elevate to is the transmutation highway. One moment, please.
Okay, and if you have any general questions, you can, as I put in the chat, info@keshe.foundation, and to contact the doctors of the Keshe Foundation, office at DE for Germany, .kfwellness.center for any of those who would seek further information or questions needing answers.
Thank you very much, Mark. So as we carry on the transmutation highway, we try to get some bearings. And one of the things that we need is to have some kind of milestones, some kind of posts, some kind of cornerstones. And we found out that it's hard to have a cornerstone when everything is in spheres. So we look at the universe, it seems to be in a sphere, some kind of field containment. We look at our existence, that's in a sphere. We aren't in a sphere. We have arms and legs, so it kind of makes it a funny statement. But we're on a planet that's in a sphere. And then we have the color wheel of everything that we see. So the thing we don't understand is the ratios and how it affects things, because if we examine the carbon ratios, even though they're on 3 different levels, the one thing we do see is that when we have carbon 16, we also have carbon 8, and the total of those two is 24. And carbon 14 and carbon 10 coming together, and that's also 24. And as we talked about carbon 12, well, it's an amalgamation of two fields, so 12 and 12 is 24. So we find that the energy in the state on all 3 levels is kind of equivalent to carbon 24. So clearly, the 24 is not the difference on each of these levels. Rather, it's the ratio. So if we look at the ratio of carbon 16 to carbon 8, we find that it's a 2-to-1 ratio. And if we look at the carbon 14 to carbon 10, we see that it's a 1.4-to-1 ratio, kind of like our commandments. So if we get to the bottom, the amalgamation of the carbon 12 into carbon 12, well, that's a 1-to-1 ratio. So as we see the levels change, the combined energy is constant, but the ratios are changing. So this becomes important to understand, because when we're looking at the relationship choices that we're making, and we found that even though we break up our dimensions into transmission, transition, and transmutation, each level has to have 3 dimensions. So we have to have 3 transmission dimensions, the amalgamation of the X, Y, and Z axis. And then the transition dimensions also has to have 3 dimensions. And then the transmutation dimension also has to have 3 dimensions. And so to go from the transition to the transmission, that's one direction. To go from the transition to the transmutation, well, that's another direction. And these are all the medium. They're not the message. The message can travel on all 3 of these mediums. But how do we make these choices? So we find that basically we have the 3 different dimensions: transmission, transition, transmutation, but they operate at different energy levels. And so we've seen with those energy levels that the ratios increase. And so that makes a difference. And so when we look at the cover of book number 3, and we see how the one universe splits up into the 2 universes, and when we look at the cover of book number 1, and we see the amalgamation of 3 different energy levels, then we have to understand that there is some kind of hidden hand behind choosing not only the position, but the size of the field and the energy state of that particular field, because clearly they're not the same. So fundamentally, when we're talking about ray creation and looking at the Kesh model of nuclear decay of the neutron, so we see the fundamental plasma of the neutron, and in the decay process, decay is an unfortunate word, part of the nuclear industry. Maybe it's an appropriate word. Regardless, we're creating an electron and a proton combination. And the electron and the proton have a relationship, and that ratio is 1,849 to 1. That's a big ratio. And then, of course, there's the release of the PM tech, and we don't know what that ratio is. But what we see is that there clearly is a difference. All 4 of these different energy states have a different size, different mass, and therefore the relationship is also different. And as a result, they create ratios, and that these ratios are representative of the relationship. And so we've frequently talked about the surface to volume ratios. And the reason for that, of course, is because when you have something that's larger, then it is bigger, then it has more. But when you create something that's smaller, then you create a higher negative charge. And the bigness and the smallness is based on the surface to volume ratio. Now, what's interesting is that the smaller has to have a higher containment. So that higher containment gives it a higher charge. But as it gets bigger, it also has to have a higher containment. But the surface tension reduces. So the tensity is dropping, which means that the containment is tending towards not being a containment. So that's changing the ratio of the containment to the tensity. And by increasing the surface to volume ratio, you reduce the size and the ratio of the size to the charge intensity. So it seems like there's a contrast here. But the net result is that the smaller has a higher charge, so it has higher energy. But the bigger has a lower charge. That's if it's negative, but it has more energy that is positive. So in both cases, you've got more. Well, how can you have more when it's bigger and more when it's smaller? And this has been the most difficult thing to understand in the plasma science until we get down to the basic functionality, where we look at the conservation of MAGRAV energy state and MAGRAV energy transfer state, which is to say there's a matter-gen convergence susceptibility and is based on magnetical and gravitational field forces. And so if you're just talking about energy state, now let's say atomic state, nanostate, and GaN state, not only are these different states, but it isn't 1 + 1 + 1, but each of these states are an order of magnitude higher in field strength. So the nanostate is 10 times the atomic state, the GaN state is 100 times the atomic state. And so there's a relationship. And so you find that the ratio of the GaN state to the atomic state is 100 to 1, but the GaN state to the nanostate is only 10 to 1. So does that mean the susceptibility would be higher for the nanostate to become a GaN state? And of course, the answer is yes. But then the nanostate could become an atomic state, and that would also be yes, because the ratio is either 10 times more or 10 times less. And so the ratio does not indicate the direction of the susceptibility. It only refers to susceptibility. So if we're at a higher energy state and we want to balance at that higher energy state, then we have to balance off the left and the right. And there we have the magnetical gravitational relationship. And so we have a ratio of the magnetical and gravitational relationship. But does the ratio on the one side equal the ratio on the other side? Well, not really. If 1 and 1 is more than 2, then 1 and it's not the same as the other one. There might be a relationship between those two, But clearly you have two that are individual, and then on the other side you have one that is a amalgamation of the other two, which we refer to as inertia. So that is in balance. But the ratio is different. And then if we compound that difference by actually changing energy states, and we say, okay, well, let's say the GaN state on the left side, we have a magnetical gravitational ratio, and we end up with a product on the nanostate on the right-hand side. Will that also be a ratio? Possibly, but not necessarily. Or will it be an inertia field? So basically, what we're seeing is that in an inertia field is the amalgamation of two fields coming together. Two fields coming together to create one. And so the choice of whether these two fields come together to create the one is a question of whether they will transition to a higher energy state or to a lower energy state. Or will it stay at the same energy state? And so that's dependent on the transfer state. And so the transfer state is part of the transition matter. And so there's a transition in two directions, because these transition states are in between. And then, since we have three dimensions, we have two in between dimensions. Oh, so we still have two in between. And so if we bring those two together, then we can come to another energy state. And so now we understand how the universe is created. It exists from energy. And so when we bring all of these energies together, the energy is always positive. So the charge is positive, but in fact, the charge reflects the motion, whether it's coming or going. And if so, if it's coming and going, then it is working in combination. And so when we look at the cover of book number 1, we see the coming together of three energy states, which is exactly what we talked about, the matter, dark matter, and antimatter. But then there's also the transfer state in between that goes from the matter to the antimatter, and then from the dark matter to the antimatter, and so on. So we have these in-between states, but they all come together to create this one field, and that one field is the inertia field. And so that is what we see in the cover of book number 1. But does that mean that there are no inertia fields in the rest of the universe? Because who's to say if it's going to be here or it's going to be there? And then when it comes together, are those going to come together and be here or even be somewhere else? So that doesn't give us enough to go by. All we understand is in the plasma rule that the higher strength feeds the weaker strength. And so what that means is that two energy fields do come together. And when they do come together, they create this binding zone. And on this planet, frequently this binding zone is a point of conflict. But the point I want to address here is that two fields come together as one field. So this binding zone field becomes a field of inertia. And for a lot of people, as I say, this field becomes a point of conflict, but in reality, it's a point of containment. And so to modify your point of view, we have to come up with a conflict resolution. And there is always a conflict resolution. So if you only look at the one side of the equation, you say, well, I need energy. I need energy for a self-serving need. And you're handy, so I might as well take it from you. So I could satisfy my energy binding needs at the expense of someone else. But then what about someone else? They have energy binding needs as well. So now they're shortchanged or robbed, which is, violating one of those 10 commandments, thou shalt not steal. And so this becomes the confounding dilemma of humanity to try and understand our relationship ratios. So if we see that the magnetical and gravitational balance comes together in what we call a Magravs position, and I use the word seeing loosely because if they are in perfect balance, then they're invisible. So either the magnetical or gravitational in their ratio. And so we see that the scientific responsibility and the spiritual responsibility are basically the same. They're part of the relationship ratio. And so some are overcommitted to the scientific solution, and some are overcommitted to the spiritual solution. But they're all part of the solution. And this is where the plasma science adds to the knowledge, because it brings these two together. And so we have to have a blend. But that blending comes with understanding, and that's what affects the rate of change. So when we're looking at what we call the awake state or the dream state, these are the two states that we're familiar with. And so we kind of represent that as our field relationships, and often it's adversarial. And we say, well, it's adversarial versus coexistence. So we see the friendly spider inviting the fly. And then we know what happens after that. And so this relationship, we have to understand, is the amalgamation of our earth space and our inner space. And so the overall rule is, this is where science meets the soul of man for peace. And so we're embarking on this course to understand this relationship, because the fundamental principle of the twinity, which is the two fields coming together as an inertia field, and we see that the speed of the rotation of the plasma of the electron is dictated by the amount of the magnetic fields which are transferred from the large twin plasma of the proton to the plasma of the smaller twin plasma of the electron. So the combination of the two create an inertia field, which we call the atom. And then we can blend fields together. That creates an inertia field. Or we can have things that work in combination. And when they work in combination, then they affect something else. And that something else becomes another inertia field. And so the combination of these two fields, which create the third field, creates a rotation and a curvature, which creates a containment. And within that containment, there has to be some kind of regulation. And that regulation is the relationship between the gravitational and magnetical force fields. So the gravitational force fields are attracting energy to make it stronger, and the magnetical force fields are making the tensity weaker and taking that energy and making the magnetical force fields stronger. And so that's how they balance out. And in that balance, you have this inertia field. And so we practiced that when we made the cups of life, because using the nanocoating process of the monatomic science, we created a representation of our inner space. And basically, it was a blend between the core space and our emotional strength. And we need to understand that, because with that emotional strength, we created two cups. One is the emotional cup, and the other is the physical cup. And is the physical cup an emotional cup? Well, if you ever played sports and you go up against a team that is physically superior, you may feel intimidated. But that would increase your emotional determination to challenge. And of course, those with the higher physical strength would probably ridicule you, insult you, and may not give all the emotion that they need to activate that physical superiority, and in fact could lose. And so we're constantly looking to balance life out. And we find that the physical manifestation, which is the inertia field that comes from the emotion controlling the physical field, and of course the emotional field, which is controlled by an emotional field, and they come together. And you can see what the Earth has done. It has brought all the ganses together. So these are all part of what we call the radiance manifestation. Carbon dioxide GANs, calcium GANs, zinc and copper GANs. And oh yes, water GANs and amino acid GANs. So to understand that when we make a reference to these GANSes, we haven't decided if they're in a matter state or in a plasma state. And then we have to understand that there's a transition state where you have the nearest proximity to the plasma and the matter. And so the Earth has done a really good job, because as you can see, there are many, many ganses, different colors, different strengths, different mass. And so this is all a combination of coming together with the PM ticks, which are magnetical. And as they come together, they converge and create this plasmagen conversion, which is bringing together the antimatter, dark matter, and the mattergen. And it creates a MAGRAV field. So this MAGRAV field is an inertia field. And then what do you take into context? So we are a MAGRAV, and the Earth is a MAGRAV, and we are interacting with this Earth. So we're creating another kind of field, another kind of inertia field. And it's representative of the interaction. And if that's all that matters, well, then that's all you take into account. But if we look at the matter plasma dimension, we cannot account for everything that we see in our physicality. All we know is that the physicality is an inertia field of the gravitational field forces that has come to the lowest energy state where we can touch it and see it. But there's another convergence in the magnetical field forces. It's in a plasmatic state, but it is a matter state that you cannot touch or cannot see. And so these two aspects of the matter plasma dimension is what we see the universe as. But these matter plasma dimensions are the feedback dimension, because these are the inertia fields that were created by the force fields coming together. And since we discount them, we're discounting the feeding dimensions, and we're only seeing the feedback dimensions. And these are the ones that we continually have reference to. So this is where we say with the matter state, and we see the bringing together of all the forces, it's an affirmation of life. But since we're matter state dominant, then, in many ways, we're denying life. And so this kind of discussion is having difficulty explaining the color wheel, because when we see the colors on this planet, and they're beautiful colors, and we get all of these colors coming from the red, green, and blue, and we know that because that's how our televisions are working and our computer monitors. And with these three color beams, we can create all the colors on the color wheel. But if we look beyond the Earth, there are no colors in the intermediate space. We don't see the colors coming from the sun to the Earth. We only see the colors once it gets inside the Earth. And so what we see is the colors coming into us. And so this becomes part of the inertia feeding vision that we have. And so all of these colors coming together create a plasmatic symbiosis because they're all in different energy states. And it's so handy that our soul is positioned at the crossroads here, where we can see how the plasmatic fields come together with the physical reality. But we have to understand that the plasmatic reality and the physical reality are two different aspects of the same reality. And they're both inertia fields. And then we have another inertia field, which is the aura, which encapsulates our body. It's representative of the soul of physicality. And some people, through clairvoyance, can see these fields. But as we found from the Earth space periodic table of prejudice, we too are prejudicial, and so we have different overlapping fields. And we demonstrate the field strength differently in different occasions. And so this becomes part of the gravitational confirmation. So to repeat, we have the magnetical field forces coming from the sun and the earth converging together from the universal field forces, all of these field forces being magnetical, and then they become translated into the gravitational field forces, which we can see. And the main one is the hydrogen. And it has a fingerprint. That fingerprint that we can see is represented in color. And that color spectrum is unique to hydrogen. And so what we have to understand is that when we see this hydrogen spectrum, we're seeing it in the Earth space. But if we were to be in any other space, let's say Mars space, that fingerprint would be the same. So the specific fingerprint of hydrogen is the same regardless of its position in the universe. And oxygen has the same characteristic. It has a fingerprint, but different from hydrogen. And it too would have the same fingerprint anywhere else in the universe. So this gravitational confirmation, this fingerprint, is a representation of the inertia field that was created from these other magnetical fields converging. And so the gravitational confirmation of the inertia field for oxygen is manifested the same way as the gravitational confirmation field for hydrogen. And then, of course, it's the same for us. But what we are is the inertia field, the combination of the attraction forces of gravitational forces and the repulsion forces of the magnetical forces. And the combination of these two blend the convergence and divergence, and each of us is different. And so each of us has a, shall we say, a ratio of the attraction to repulsion forces, which is why we're all independent variables. But what is constant is that we're all part of the interdependent universe, which is to say that the universe has rules, and these rules are the same wherever you are. So when we look at our soul and how it interacts with the universe, we see that there's this three-layer supergranular layer that encapsulates the brain. And that becomes the connection to the feeding forces of the plasma universe. And then when we look at the brain, this is the feeding force to our physical universe, which is part of our physicality. So the brain becomes the inertia field of the plasmatic feeding forces, and the body becomes the inertia field of the feeding forces from the brain. And so, well, wait a second. If we have all these magnetical forces coming together, different fields coming together into this one field of the brain encapsulated by the supragranular layer, so we create the one field. Now we have the one field, how do we create the physicality? Well, then we understand that the brain has two sides. There's a left side and a right side. And these are two fields that are working together. And so they create an inertia field, and that's our physicality. And how could that small brain create such a big body? Well, if we understand that the different energy states are operating at an order of magnitude different, so we could say that the soul of physicality is operating, let's say, the one order of magnitude stronger than the physicality, that would be 10. Then the soul of the man would be another order of magnitude, so that would be another 10 times. And then when we look at the relationship of the soul of the man to the soul of the physicality, that's only 10 times. And the relationship of the soul of physicality to the physicality, that's only 10 times. But if we look at the relationship of the soul of man to the physicality, well, that's 10 times 10, that's 100 times. And so we have to understand there's a relationship between the magnetic and gravitational field forces. And so these are two field forces that are overlapping, and they create an inertia field. And that inertia field becomes part of the physicality, which is the lowest energy state. And so within that lowest energy state, we can start to see colors, and then we can start to see and interpret what these colors mean. And so, you know, on our planet, we can see some rainbows. But do we know what these rainbows mean? Because what we have to understand is that there is a color sequence on these rainbows. So one rainbow has the blue on the inside and the red on the outside. And there's another rainbow that has the red on the inside and the blue on the outside. So we can clearly say that the rainbow is a inertia field manifestation of fields. Do we know which fields we're talking about? is one real and the other one fake? Are they both real? Are they both fake? Or are they in the eyes of the beholder? Or, you know, are they just a hologram? And so often it's been said that life is an illusion, and this is what we're trying to unravel. So light can be manipulated. And we said it can be scattered through diffraction, and it can convergence. It can converge, and then there's also focusing. You can change the focus. And of course, light going through different mediums will experience what we call a refraction. And off a mirror, you might have a reflection. And then going through different densities, you have a bending. And so we were talking about snooker the other day. And there are things about these games that make it very, very interesting. And so this is not a lesson on how to shoot pool. This is a lesson on rotation. And so if we were to take a cue ball and print a grid on it and hit it right smack dab in the middle and hit it dead straight in the center, no spin, it would travel to the bottom bank and it would bounce off that bank, come back. And if the shot was true, in other words, no spin, no deflection, it would come back basically to the tip of the cue, exactly where it left. And that's one cue ball or one field. But that's taking care of your shot. But the games are played by putting balls in pockets, and usually it requires a putt shot. And so if we have the same scenario and we have this dead straight in the center with no spin, if we align it up properly, and we know that we can do this because we just demonstrated that we could hit the cue ball and have it bounce straight back. If we did the same thing and it hit an object ball with no spin, it should go in a straight line. And putting the ball in the pot is the name of the game. And who can do this better is the better player. And if you do it within the rules, you might win. But there's skill involved. So what happens if you put spin on it? So instead of dead straight, let's go back to just putting a spin on the cue ball. So here we can offset it a little bit to the left. And as we hit it, it'll spin to the left. But we still have to hit that spot on the rail. And when it comes in contact with the rail, no, it doesn't come straight back. It deflects to the left. So we can change the effect of the cue ball by imparting a rotation. If we impart a rotation to the cue ball, what does that do to the object ball? So if we do the same thing to the cue ball and offset to the left and spin to the left, immediately there's an imparting deflection to the right. In other words, opposite to what the spin is. And so how much spin and how much deflection is based on what we call the siding, which is putting a spin on, and the stroke, which is the power behind the cue. And so if you understand the siding to stroke ratio, you can balance this out. Because you can balance the siding to the deflection ratio. You can balance the stroke to the deflection ratio. And if you are really skillful, you can take the siding and stroke combination. The siding being 1, the stroke being 1, not the same one, but working in combination to affect the deflection ratio. So the deflection ratio becomes the inertia field. And therefore, when you impart the siding and the stroke to the deflection ratio and take all of those components and impart them to the object ball, if you're really, really good at this, you will be able to position the cue ball where you want it, and you'll be able to make the pot shot into the pocket. And who can do this better? Well, generally speaking, they win. This is not a lesson on shooting pool, so let's play soccer. And often we talked about it bending and like Beckham. And of course, David Beckham was a famous English soccer player, and he had a fabulous skill. He could impart a spin on the ball, and so the ball would be shot towards the target. However, there would be an extra energy imparted into the ball, which would change its direction. And so the initial target, if it had no spin, would come to the left side of the net. But because of the spin, it starts to deflect. So the game is actually to balance off and compare the imparting of the energy field of the shooter versus the understanding of the receiver. Can the receiver see the energy that is imparted into that ball? And that becomes a skill. And David Beckham was excellent at this. And so he could fool the goalie into believing that the ball was traveling the way the goalie was used to it, not taking into account the imparting of the extra energy. So, as knowledge seekers, we have 2 points of view. So, there is a message sender and there's a message receiver. So as a teacher, that would be a message sender. As a student, that would be a message receiver. But where does the teacher receive the energy? So there has to be a sender. And the energy and the message are one and the same. The question is the medium. And so we have to have practice. It's either a hit or a miss, isn't it? And so there's a reward, isn't it? So in soccer, if you're going to pass the ball, then you have to impart the correct energy to hit the man. So that your teammate can receive the ball. That's called hitting the target. But if you miss the man, then that's called missing the target. But what do you call when you miss the man and you hit the target? Well, if the target is a net, then the hit is a goal. So if you miss the man and is your teammate, then you did a bad thing. But if you missed a man and it's the opposing goalie, then you did a good thing. So you have to kind of decide, do you have to hit the man or you have to hit the net? And gather up your rewards accordingly. So we understand that there are ratios, and these have to do with the rules to the parameters ratio. What does that mean? Well, the speed of light obeys rules within a set of parameters. And within that set of parameters, the speed of light is constant. Is the speed of light constant in all different dimensions? What is constant is that the constant speed of light obeys the same rules in all parameters. So the speed of light is not the same in all dimensions. But the ratio of the rules to parameters is what affects the color and what affects the curvature. So for instance, when you're looking at the curvature of light, we find that the density of the medium will change. So if we have sugar that's dissolved in water and that sugar sinks to the bottom of the water, we find that the sugar saturated water at the bottom is more dense than the water at the top. And so as the light hits the denser medium, it will bend. Interesting thing happens to water in the atmosphere. We find that the density of the water diminishes as we go up in temperature. So the density of the water changes in the morning, and then it becomes less dense at noon, and then at night starts to become more dense again. So the density of the water is changing based on atmospheric positioning. What about the nitrogen to hydrogen ratio? The difference between NH2 and NH3, we still have the same crystalline formation. we still have the ratios in terms of structure, but clearly the ratio of nitrogen to hydrogen on the one side is 1 to 2, and now the ratio on the other side is 1 to 3. But it doesn't seem to have changed any, but the mass ratio has changed. So we see that when we're talking about the speed of the soul, we have to understand that based on Einstein's equation of mass equals the speed of light squared times is equal to the energy. And the speed of light squared, of course, is the relationship between the frequency and the wavelength. Then we can see that, well, wait a second. These obey what we call the inverse square law. But that's only in 2 dimensions. So when we look at the inverse cube law, that would be in 3 dimensions. And so we know that. So when we're looking at oxygen, for instance, and we see the cube on how its basic crystalline structure. But if we change the dimension ratios, we can change the shape and we can change the angles. It still is a crystalline formation, and still the points are still attached, but things have changed. And so if we look at the individual axes, the z-axis, y-axis, and x-axis, these are the individual dimensions of the cube, but we can change them. And so the dimensions may overlap, or they may even twist. And so we understand that there's a range transcendence between the magnetic and gravitational field forces. So we start with the lowest energy state, which is heat and electricity. We get into the nuclear state, then the plasma state, and then there's this transfer state between the physical matter and the non-physical matter, the dynamic plasma state. And this is all part of the range of the matter state. And then we can change what we're looking at based on the focal point, which the focal point is concentration on the physicality. So we're literally focusing on how the light is diverging. What? How do you focus on the diversion? Because it obeys the inverse square law. That is to say, there's a relationship between the distance and the intensity. You double the distance, you have the intensity. So what does that mean? So the inverse square law is based on the density and the intensity to distance ratio. So at the point of the source of light, in this case being a flashlight, the source intensity related to the destination distance is the highest. It's 8 to 1. If we have the source drop it down to 4, we would double the intensity. So make it 4 to 2, which breaks down to 2 to 1. If we halve that again by doubling the source, by doubling the distance, then it goes from 4 to 2 to 2 to 4. So now the ratio is 1 to 2. So there's a change in the ratio. But all we did was we just doubled it or halved it. And yet the ratio fluctuation is fairly radical. By doubling the distance, we reduced the intensity by 4 times. And it doesn't matter which direction we're doing it, because we can shine the light to the down, to the earth, or we can shine the light to the sky. The rules are the same. It just doesn't matter. So we find that this light carries a mass. And so within this field, it operates at a certain speed. But we find that if we change the mass, we have to change the speed. And so when we look at the speed of light within the dimension of our physicality, the speed of the light is constant, but the wavelength and frequency change. So the speed of light is constant. And those are the parameters. And those are the rules. So when we look at our plasma dimensions, what we see in terms of skin color is different. But what we are constituted from is the same. And so therefore, within this parameter of this earth, we are able to have a range of different colors. And yet we are all part of this interdependent universe. But we're all independent variables. And so we all have this transmission spectrum, the difference between the non-visible speed of plasmatic rotation and the speed of the visible transmission spectrums. Because the surface superficiality is different from the internal substance of the plasma substrate. Because when we look at the physicality, can we see the energy that is being imparted? Or do we just see the result? Are we just satisfied? Well, we either hit the target, pot the shot, or score the goal. And that's it. That's what life is all about, isn't it? Life is a competition. And who is more skillful wins. And it's funny when you talk to the professionals, they really want that trophy. Yeah, they get paid. They get paid, but not all the same. Some get more than others. And yet, they're all part of the team. So the teammates are all equal, aren't they? But some are more equal than others. Because some know how to impart the energy into the ball and impart their understanding of the rules of the game better. But within that point of containment is an amalgamation of all these plasmatic interactions. And so that becomes the inertia field, the combination of the gravitational field forces and the magnetical field forces. And so if that is true within that dimension, and if those are the parameters of that dimension, and then when we go one step beyond, the parameters may change, but the rules are the same. And so this is what we understand in terms of frequency. But if we go beyond that, well, we have the conservation of susceptibility. So we are just independent plasmatic variables. And there's an energy field that is imparted. And each of us interpret this energy differently. And each of us use this energy differently. And so the question becomes, is how do you impart that? And what are the parameters? So when we look at a transmutation quadrant, we find that there's light that's emitted, there's light that's feeding, and then there's light that is reflected, and light that is absorbed. And so we find that even though the structure remains the same, the transmutation ratios change. And so here we have the quadrants within our range of, shall we say, our visible range or our understanding range. So how do we go beyond that and look, well, in the beginning? So we had the one neutron, and that came before the atom. And then, of course, it created the PM tick. And then, of course, there's us. But before us, there had to be a place for us to be. Where were we? Because we had to wait. We had to wait for the Earth space transmutation state, the coming together of the two fields that created the Earth. The combination, the soul of the sun, the soul of the earth, and the soul of the creator coming together, the gravitational conformation of the earth space. So therefore, there had to be a confirmation of the outer space transmutation state. Because wherever we were, we are now here. And here we can go through the various steps, the various energy states, the atomic, the monatomic, the polyatomic, and the plasmatic. But we can go one step beyond. And when we go one step beyond, we get to within the barrier. But then we can go beyond that barrier. And so the whole purpose of the inertia classes is to understand that there are two steps. And we discovered that because last year at the Sanya conference, we hit the watershed moment when we not only could change our position on this planet, but we could replicate the convergent forces of the planet and create gold the same way that the earth does. And so we all have path choices now based on pathling and susceptibility to understand the difference between attention and retention. Both are a form of emission. And they interact, two fields come together to create an emission of intention. So that one step beyond is now beyond ultrasound, where we make the connection between the soul of the man and the interaction. And what interaction is that? So we have to elevate our antennas to understand that there's a message feeding and there's a feedback manifestation. So we have to tune in to these transmissions and understand that when we select one force and it's magnetical, it is balanced by a force selection of another gravitational force. And this is the message that coming together is a mag-grav manifestation. So that mag-grav is an inertia field. And the inertia manifestation on this planet is a peace dome. And so the transmutation that we have is manifested in balance with the peace dome. And the source of that manifestation, the feeding source of that manifestation, is also in balance with a peace stone. And so if we hope to return, we have to understand that we have to have a balance. So that knowledge, wisdom that we give is part of the insight that we have. We add to that insight through experience. That experience is part of our nature that allows us to reflect on life. And so when we look at the relationship, how 1 and 1 comes together to be more than 2, we have to blend the emission spectrum and the reflection on that. And with our skill set, we can bring artistry, organization, and cooperation together. And if we want to hit the target, we have to know if we're going to pass it to a teammate or if we're going to score the goal, so that we don't get into this hodgepodge of discord and betrayal. And so we have to understand that the speed of rotation affects the transmutation transition, as we did with the pool cube. But we are in a blue planet, and so the rotation of this planet transmutes energy. And our understanding of this transmutation, and within the parameters of this Earth space, teach us that the balance is in the micro and in the macro, and the rules are the same. And the pH of peace transcends the entire universe. There are many points on the field strength of the dove beyond. And so the nutrition and wellness centers that we're doing through the transmutation testing in this current 3-month process, now coming up in January, will be the 3rd month. So please enjoy these sessions and teach us how to take advantage of the feeding forces that are coming from the universe into our inertia fields. And then we need to learn more and promote the space plasma research teams. This is what teamwork is all about, so that we can enhance the transmutation process so that our range transition transcends the inertia field transmutation dimensions. And the laws of conservation, we know that they govern the covalent, trivalent, and tetravalent bonding attributes. And the containment of the inertia is governed by ratios. This is why the soul of the man cannot be abandoned, cannot be compromised. The color of man is based on the integration with the soul of the man. This is the integrity of man. That is within our domain. And so that inertia field of the greater oneness is to transcend the limitations of nuclear science, which we have been endeavoring for 570 knowledge seeker workshops weekly, every Thursday, for over 10 years. This is Kish Foundation Spaceship Institute Teachings on Plasma Science, welcoming all the beautiful knowledge seekers, learning about the new solution process of the new plasma science. Requires a world peace treaty. Please sign it, display it, and please understand that when you sign it with true intention. You sign it with the proper intention to hit the target. Because the man is a reactor of a 3-dimensional transcendent universe. And we see there are no straight lines through field transmutation. And man cannot go into outer space without a peace stone. So is the inertia of the present governed by dimensions of history? How do we impart the transition of energy states of inertia. These ratios affect the susceptibility to change, the physical transmission dimensions. So please, bring the plasma science in, because it needs to be delivered daily by the Pisto in exchange for peace on Earth. And so welcome to the new outer space age. And that's the end of the class. I hope you all enjoyed it. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you, Alex. And let's see what anyone has to say. Or if you triggered any questions, or did you go over the head of the participants? Let's see if anyone has a question or an idea or a confirmation of what you said. Feel free to open your mics. Not all at once, but feel free. I was thinking, Alex, while you were sharing your understanding, could I know Mr. Kesh had said the only reason we manifest the way we manifest is the soul passing through the magnetic fields of this planet or the inertia of this planet. So it seems like it's almost an automatic. Can we equate inertia to weather in a way? In other words, I open the door to my home. I see it's snowing and very cold outside, so that means I'd have to dress myself appropriately. I open the door under one inertia condition, let's say, even though weather is not probably inertia. Or another condition, I open the door and it's quite warm. And so obviously I don't need the gloves and the winter coat. Now I can go out in the shorts and perhaps a t-shirt and some sandals. Is this how we can sort of look at inertia in a way? I don't think it becomes part of us, but it's an interaction that we have with an energy or something along that line, that we have to sort of go with whatever inertia we're in and manifest according to that inertia, and of course the magnetical and gravitational fields of the location. So to me, it's almost an automatic. Different inertia will change your outside appearance, perhaps, maybe not so much on the inside, but the outside. And then, of course, I open the door to the home. It's raining. Now I need a different sort of apparel. And just equating that with different inertias in different locations around this perhaps solar system or this galaxy. Could we look at it like that? Is that something? Because it just seems that it's an automatic that you this type of soul that we have has to manifest in this shape on this planet. And different souls obviously manifest differently in the same inertia, as we see the different fauna and the rest of the vertical and horizontal people. So I'm thinking it's almost, we could equate it to a weather condition, but it's not weather, obviously, and maybe that's not the appropriate example, but to me, that's what I was thinking. It changes what you have to use as an outer shell of manifestation. Just a thought. I don't know if you want to comment on it or someone else would like to.
Tell me when you're finished with your question.
Yeah, it's not a question, it's just a statement, really. And according to my understanding.
No, I think it's a very good question that you're asking, because so the variability of all of us on this planet is important to understand. We are all equal. So the concept of more equal than others is out of the question. All of life is for learning. And so sometimes the so-called buffoon can really teach you a lot. And of course, sometimes a buffoon will make a very catastrophic error. And in that point, it would be a really, really good lesson for you, because sometimes the error is not so damaging. So, it's like, let's say, if I'm trying to pass a ball to a teammate and I miss them, and you say, well, that's an error. But what happens if someone is going into a building with the intention to blow it up, and as they put the dynamite there, they trigger the dynamite and they blow themselves up and the building? So, there are lots of lessons to be learned from that. The point of the matter is that we have two emissions. One is the emission of what we give our time and attention to, and the other emission is what we learn. And the reason you say, well, isn't that an absorption? Well, once you absorb it, it becomes part of you. So in order to become part of you, it has to then interact with you and becomes part of your intention. And your intention has to be converted to attention. So when you give your time and attention to something, that becomes part of your intention. And so this is affected and manifests through path length and susceptibility. So the question is, what is our susceptibility to come to this planet? And so by arriving at this planet, we become susceptible to the field forces on this planet. So very self-serving. And so doesn't that affect our intention? So yes, it does. However, it didn't manifest until we arrived at this planet. So when you look at the imparting of the energy into the pool cue, which imparts the energy into the cue ball, which imparts the energy to the object ball. So then the thing that is not seen in this particular picture is who is holding the cue. And so you could say, based on your question, that, because we have this spin and the power and the deflection and all these other circumstances, and then of course, this is a contrived situation where you have a dead-on shot. The rest of the game has to do with angles and everything. So we forget that there's a guy that's holding the stick. And that is also part of the game. And that person who is holding the stick is making the decisions. So if we look at what we have here on this earth, we have to understand that the rules are the same, the parameters are different. The energy coming to this planet has to have some kind of motivation, some kind of hand, shall we say, behind the stick. So in this case, this is a pool cue to direct the action, as opposed to a spear, which is designed as a weapon. So both have a pointy end and a thick end, and both, require some skill. But one allows you to play games, and the other one, well, the other one's designed for killing. The point I'm trying to make is this. when there's a fire, people react in two ways. One, they run away from it, or they run towards it. This planet has problems. And all of us have run towards it. So that means we could do something about it. And that's the lesson we have to learn. That's a direct answer to your question, Mark.
Right, but when we leave this planet, we don't take the inertia with us, do we? It's not become part of us, even though the soul has its.
No, no, definitely. No, no, of course it's become part of us because the inertia field is a manifestation of our learning process. The inertia field is ingrained in our myelin sheath around all our nerves and becomes a part of our connection and communication.
That's on this planet. That's on this planet, but if we go to another location, we don't bring that same inertia with us. It has its own inertia.
No, of course we do. That is, you know, our what do you call it? That's our profit. That's our profit from being on this planet. It's part of the learning profit. Because before we came to this planet, and if we understand that, you know, we were born as a baby and you didn't remember anything until, you know, several years passed by after you were born. So how were you able to even exist? Because that memory that you had accumulated up until that point in time was ingrained and imparted in your DNA. So then the DNA becomes the blueprint for your manifestation. Okay, so that's the blueprint, but that is not the source of the intention. So the intention, the connection is through the RNA. So the RNA interprets your blueprint in your physicality, and then from there it manifests. So the inertia field of the physicality is amalgamation of the two fields, the RNA field with the DNA field. So the question really is who imparted the energy that manifests the RNA field? It's the one that's holding the stick. And so since we're in matter state, we see ourselves as holding the stick. But the thing is, in this game, we hold the stick and impart the energy, and then the cue balls are just a reflection of our intention. But humanity are not cue balls. But we too reflect the intention. And the primary intention is from the creator, and the secondary intention is our intention. Because we share that with the creator, but the creator doesn't make us just individually special. Each and every one of us is sharing that intention with the creator. So, you know, the farther we get away from the creator, then the lower the intensity. Is that what the ratio is? Well, that's the ratio in physicality. But in terms of the plasma, there is no distance and there is no time. And so it becomes instantaneous. So that the connection to the creator is direct and foremost. It just is a matter of, do we have the skill set to understand how it works and then incorporate it within our physicality? And then you think you'll find that more and more people are starting to utilize that particular skill. Because first of all comes the awareness that we do have the skill, And second of us, we're starting to understand the rules of the game. And so it isn't just you take the cue ball and you hit the object ball and pot the shot. You have to have a little bit of skill, and you have to impart different kinds of energies to get the result that you desire. And right now, the energy that we're getting on this planet is not the energy that we desire. The energy that we have on this planet is the energy that drew us here, because our desire is to correct it. And we can. But we cannot do it with the lowest energy state. We have to do it with a higher energy state, and we have to do it in combination. And as Mr. Kesh said, the reserves are here. To you.
Good. Let's see if anyone else. Thank you, Alex. Let's see if anyone else has a thought or a question or a comment they'd like to raise.
Hello, how are you?
That sounds like
No,
this.
hello. Thank you. Only say thank you so much for all people in the back during always year, of course, during the future the same. I hope it's the same. Continue growing to elevate the souls for all around not only the earth and around the universal community too. And thank you, because always you give more knowledge, like Alex working all the time with us, weekly with Marx, for example, Randy, many people, Elias, all I'm sorry, forgot many names, all around the world is working together for contribute for the peace, for continue growing the Kesha Foundation. And thank you so much. And I hope the next year is more firm in conclusion to the way to the peace. I think it's better. It's time. It's transition time, but it's time for the peace too. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Elizabeth. And as we've heard, we're all carrying a very small piece of this very large carpet. So we thank everybody, as Mr. Kesh did, for the simple systems you've made and the Ganses you've produced and the other things. It's helped to bring the change and allowed him to operate, I think, with some sort of validity, let's say, that this is just not, again, a cult or some pseudo-science, but this is the real science of creation. And I think we're hitting on it. Thank you, Elizabeth. And more, yes, and more people, when they hear the truth, I think they'll start to gravitate towards it more and more. But as Mr. Kesh said, he's been hidden, so to speak, in plain sight. Not enough people are yet aware of it, but with the new changes and the new technology, I think we're going to see a huge gravitational pull towards the Kesh Foundation for those who want to know or want to find out more about the truth of who they are, and so on and so forth. Yes, it's going to be a very positive year, as Mr. Kesh said, for the vision of 2025. Is there another question or comment or thought anyone would like to bring? It is the holiday time, and hopefully we've realized more and more that all of these different paths of belief have really come out of this idea of Mitraism, or the idea of the soul from probably, as Mr. Kesh indicated, about 8,000 years ago, when man started to find out about his soul and created that room of fire to sort of represent that eternal flame, or the light, as we say. And as the days grow longer, hopefully we become more and more enlightened, which brings an elevation of the soul. Or does the soul elevate first and then you become enlightened? Anyone want to answer that?
Well, I can jump in on that one then, Mark. The enlightenment of the soul, the soul of the man is already enlightened. Soul of the man is directly connected to the Creator.
Can we call it a maturity then?
No, what we have to do, well, yes, maturity is certainly a factor, but well, you know, that's a really good point, because let's face it, when we came to this planet, you know, we came as a baby, and so in order to transmute with the new foundation technology, we would transmute as an adult. So we don't have to transmute as a baby. And then, you know, imagine if you're going from North America to Europe, let's say, and you know, you arrive in France as a baby. That would not be very good. So we have to arrive as an adult. So that maturity, I would now have to stand corrected and agree with you. But the point I wanted to bring up is we just assume that there's only one soul. And so the concept of having a second soul, what we call the soul of physicality, and what the spiritual community has often referred to as the spirit, this is not as hard to understand as in the first place. You know, we kind of, if we hear this for the first time, it's very shocking. It was very shocking to find that the soul of the man was within. And I'm speaking from personal experience, because all my life I had no idea where the soul was, because whoever I talked to, you know, well, the soul was somewhere, but you know, we didn't quite know where. But that's okay. We know it's there, but it's somewhere, but we don't know where. And so then we find out what that is, and then we found that there's a second soul, and we said, hey, wait a second, you know, now we're schizophrenic, are we? But then if we find out that how these things work together, then we find out the ratio of the dominance of the two souls. So the ratio of the dominance of the two souls manifests their physicality, but the ratio of the response is dominated by the physical soul. And that's our problem. So we have a feeding balance, but we don't have a feedback balance. We have a feedback domination. And so we are discounting that which is feeding us, which is kind of backwards, right? So we now have to understand that these are the rules. They are within our parameters here, but different energy states have different parameters, but the rules are the same. And the rules are that two fields coming together create an inertia field. And that's what we're discussing. So looking forward to the new year. I want to thank everybody for allowing me to continue to present. And so this is the end of 2024. Wish everybody a happy new year. And we look forward to getting into this subject in more detail, because understanding this duality and understanding that this is a feature of humanity, and it needs to be cultivated, and the skill set needs to be worked on. So looking forward. Back to you.
Okay, anyone else have a question or a thought? You know, I was hearing someone talk about how they weighed the weight loss when somebody passes, and they've done this number of probably hundreds of times where they have somebody hooked up on wires and they're on a scale. And when the person expires, let's say, and I guess they get some readings, there's a lot of activity within the brain. And then there's all of a sudden a slight weight drop in a human being, they were saying. And we heard Mr. Kesh talk about this. Apparently, you know, it's been documented. So the soul is definitely within your structure. And I don't know how many grams of weight is happening, but the person I was listening to, they were saying when they did it with the animals and the animal passed away, they never noticed a reduction in the weight. Now, maybe they're simpler souls, but they do have a soul, and we would think there would be some sort of a change in weight, as happens to the soul of the man when it leaves. But I was wondering why, if all souls are equal in a way, even though there are simpler souls, I think, and so on, why would animals not register the same on the weight scale? Anyone want to sort of address that? We know they have a soul, but it doesn't seem to be able to be recorded. Again, I don't know how accurate what I'm telling you is, but we do know the definitely within the body of the man, that experiment has been conducted hundreds of times and coming up with pretty similar results. There's a definite weight loss, but why not with the, let's say, horizontal people? Anyone? Which we refer to the animals. And in the foundation, we call them horizontal people because they move that way.
You know, the only comment that I can make on that subject is that I have no certainty that the measuring equipment is adequate. And I can't reference if that is a true scientific experiment under, you know, proper controlled circumstances. But you know, there are a lot of questions that are unanswered on this planet. But
So many books need to be opened.
when we look at, you know, how much, you know, we can give our time and attention to, and what we give our time and attention to, we come to the point where we start to realize that some things are more important than others. And when we try and understand how that affects us in practical terms, a lot of us don't have the grace in our lives to be able to devote to either academic research or scientific research or even philosophical research until, as the soldier says, when he's in the trench and the bombs are blowing up all around him, the kind of trauma that they experience if they were to survive that, and how it lingers. You know, you can't possibly describe that in words. And this is one of the reasons so many soldiers have, you know, what we call PTSD. But we learn from these experiences that there are other factors to take into account. And these other factors do affect our life. And that stress that a soldier might feel from the bombs coming around him could be similar to the kind of stress someone could feel on a career path or a family path or a social path or an athletic path. So the stress factors that come into play can be uh, can affect you in so many different ways. And the amplification can come from so many different directions. And, you know, there's a lot of pressure on, let's say, sports athletes. And it's really hard to be sympathetic for them because the compensation that they get financially is extremely disproportionate to that of the common person. And so someone in a job, for instance, with a family to look after can experience enormous pressure comparable to that of an athlete. But there's a lot of financial pressure. The athlete doesn't have to worry about that because they are well paid. But maybe they don't manage as well. So we see the same thing in careers. We have people who are really well paid, and yet they don't have anything to show for it because they're not good money managers. So they make a lot of money, but they don't have any more money than a poor person. And you wonder why that is. And then the resentment sets in. So all of these factors come into play, and they are all variables. So the point of this answer is that we have to find out what it does for us in a practical sense and how we can implement that. And when we find that the energy coming from the universe is bountiful and unconditional, and then if we enlist the services of that, it totally changes our outlook. And it's our outlook which becomes the creator. So we then can manifest with more skill. But we have to be truthful, because that manifestation comes from the elevation of our soul of physicality, or the maturity, the elevation through maturity, to recognize that the soul of physicality, the soul of the man, have to work together. And whatever is created is an inertia field. And the rules are the same. Over to you.
Anyone else want to bring a question, a comment, or take exception to what you've heard today, which is no problem at all? I was thinking how, if we can turn this corner on the weapons manufacturing and you start having 1 million people working in this new space program in the dimension of energy, or 2 million or 5 million or 10 million, the amount of knowledge that'll be disseminated across this planet and the elevation of all of us is going to be quite immense, I would think, as people start asking you maybe, how's your soul today? Oh, you're not feeling so well? Well, I know what to do. I'll just send you some fields. And they start working with this new knowledge. And again, moving away from the war and destruction to the elevation and enlightenment of others. I think this is going to be a huge push in the dimension of understanding the process of creation and the creator and the rest. So as I continue to say, our best tool is your actual energies to support this whole process and the elevation of the world leaders, religious leaders, and the others. But can you imagine, with millions of people working in this dimension of the, and of course being sort of guided by the Keshe Foundation in a way on what to look for, or perhaps what to change, or to run certain experiments, the amount of knowledge growth on this planet and understanding ourselves is going to be, I think, at a peak that it's never been before on this planet. As we know from the teachings of the Keshe Foundation, the existence and the location of your soul has been purposely hidden from mankind. It's been orchestrated that way. Yes, Fo, or Alex. I think Fo just wanted to say good night, perhaps. Fo, it's very late in Europe, and we respect you being here, or any of the Europeans that join us. Thank you, Karsten, as well, because it's past 11 as I read it. But is there a comment you wanted to make? And of course, this won't just be in the United States.
Just
Yes.
like you said, I'm going to sleep.
You're going to the land of the lovers. Enjoy.
Yeah, so something like that.
Thank you so much for being here.
Okay. Well, nice being here.
Yes, we appreciate your sharing of the knowledge. And it was nice to see Mosvek appearing as well, although he didn't open his mic. It was nice to feel his fields.
Okay. Well, see you next week.
Thank you, Fo. We appreciate it. We appreciate everyone. Whether you've opened your mic, you haven't opened your mic, as Rick says, the biggest game is just appearing if you can. And of course, you don't have to appear, as we understand, completely in the matter state. You can also be there on the soul level, which we're all beginning to understand. So, Alex, if the more billiards I play, the deeper I'll understand this knowledge. I'd like to tell my wife that, and maybe she'll allow me to play billiards more often. But yes, I can see there's so many different positions and curves and spins, and the way you handle the cue and the rest of it all comes into play. Very nice analogy today.
Well, yeah, because you know, this is the thing. The rules of plasma science and the rules of the skill set you need for playing pool or snooker is the same. And it's just a matter of understanding how to interpret these rules, and obviously there are different tools. But you know, the rules are kind of the same, and the same thing happens in soccer, because let's face it, if you hit something, that's your teammate. You want to hit your teammate so that your teammate can keep the ball. If you miss your teammate, then your team will lose the ball, and then the other team will have the ball. So that's not good. But the reward is when you miss the goalie. So as we travel plasmatically and transmute, we are guaranteed to get to the destination safely because of the interaction of the plasmatic fields. There won't be any collisions. This is, you know, in physicality, we have to really work at that. But if we can, well, what is the difference? The difference is when you kick the ball, you are imparting an energy into that ball. But when you have a plasma field, you don't kick it, but you do impart the energy, and that's the difference. And that ball, that energy pack, and that could be just an energy, it's just a thought, or it could be the transmutation of your entire physical being, would arrive safely. You will not hit any objects on the way. You will get directly to your other target, which is the net, and you will arrive there safely. It's just the basic concept of understanding
Sure.
that, you know, when there's an urgency, you run towards it to resolve it. And when there's a calamity, you run away to seek refuge. And when someone comes with malicious intent, you see the plasma fields stop working. And there is no blockage, there's no physical touch, there's no, stepping on the brakes. The plasma fields just stop rotating. And this is the lessons that we have to learn. And we don't see that in the physical context so much. But, we see in our society so many broken marriages. We see brothers fighting. We see friends become enemies and so on. And we see a lot of people who are working to achieve that. And they think that makes them successful. And so their creation of their success is based on destroying you. That not only doesn't make sense, but more importantly, it violates universal laws. And we're going to have a harsh lesson taught to us very shortly. So on that note, I'm going to pass it back to you.
Okay. Okay. As you said, with the prejudice of did you say the elements? So what happens when we go to hundreds of different elements? Does that mean we're going to increase you talked about the table of prejudice, I think, earlier. Maybe you just want to, if we open up more elements, obviously they're there, it's just we haven't found them yet. And I think this will go with emotion, but how is this prejudice, the table of prejudice?
Well, the table of prejudice is very simple in that something is always something, and it's always something as opposed to being something else. So the creation energy is common to all. So the fundamental construct of each of these elements is the same. And this is what I'm saying. It just like, it just like the color of the skin or the difference in the animals. You look at plankton. You look at whales. Talk about a difference in size. But, the way we understood it from the false science, had to do with our trophic categories where the bigger ate the smaller. It only stands to reason that the big guy can, put the smaller in his mouth. But, we're so smart, we take the big guy and we cut it up so that we can cut it up into small pieces so that we can put it in our mouth. But, it seems like the whale is the smartest. He just opens his mouth and he swallows everything. But they don't go after, the next on the food chain. They go, right to the most important. And the most important is the plankton. And why is that? Because of the extremely high surface to volume ratio that it has an extremely high negative charge, which the whale needs because it's extremely gravitational. It is the biggest gravitational thing living on this planet. So it really needs a lot. And the small tidbits it gets from sardines and stuff like that isn't cutting it. It needs more energy. So it's not interested in the physical size. It's interested in the energy transfer. Smart whales, very smart. But, we're smarter. So we should be able to do more. But, we've abdicated that responsibility to others, assuming that they would have the same responsibility that we have. And we find that they don't, and they disappoint us. And so the only thing that's constant is disappointment. So if you can't trust, to have someone look after things, then you kind of have to do it yourself. And it's not that you want to be the micromanager. It's that you want to be the manager, but you want to be more of yourself. And so what you do is you enlist the services of other force fields that are like-minded. And as they come together, well, now you have growth. So, and then you have teamwork. And this is how we're working. So we're a team of 8 billion people, and we have some who are not very good teammates, but most of us have, and I mean the majority of the most of us have good intentions. And so we need to cultivate that more. And that's our goal for the new year. So I'm going to pass the mic over to you and the screen and everything. Thanks so much, Mark, for everything that you've done.
All of us. All of us. As we say, we're more or less cheering on and dabbling in the science a little bit. Hopefully we'll see more work in this area of the lab and trying to do a few things. But as I said, the technology is waiting for you in the Keshe Foundation store. Would anyone else like to make a comment or ask a question before I play the final disclaimer?
An next little
Yes,
word.
please.
Please continue working with the and send energy to Mr. Keshe for recovering the health.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, for equilibrate the health and protect your physicality too, because it's time for Mr. Keshe need stay very strong, and your physicality too. Thank you so much.
Yes, I think he's developing a surprise for all of us, as was announced by the Brazilian team in a way. As he said, he lets conditions go to the extreme before he addresses them and tests everything on himself before we get it. So perhaps this is one of those times where, again, what is about to appear will be sort of neutralized or balanced out within those who understand what to do with it, if I could be so cryptic as that. Any other thoughts or comments before we close? Alex, I'll take the screen. I'm going to play the final disclaimer, and the meeting will come to an end. And thank you all, as Elizabeth said, for all the work you've done in the past year and all the work you'll be doing in the following year. And hopefully we don't look at it as work, but enlightenment of ourselves and enlightenment and elevation of the others. As Mr. Keshe indicated, even if the others do better than you or elevate above you, it's not a problem. So we need to look at things along that line. Yes, let's see, somebody put something in the chat. Thank you very much, Mark, Alex, and everyone. We wish a wonderful new year. Yes, thank you, Jefferson. New Year's Eve and 2025 plasmatic fulfillment to all. Yes, I think this is the direction, as I said, it appears, and to the Keshe Foundation as well, that things are coming together in a beautiful way. But we'll have to see. And we don't take anything, I think, for granted. It will be delivered, and hopefully it'll be delivered in this cycle, and we won't have to wait for another grand opportunity for things to come together to, again, have that chance to bring in the change for 2025. So continue to use your energies to support the process. Join on a regular basis as you choose, of course, and extend that to more often if you can. And it's all working in this dimension of energy to bring the change, our true nature. Thank you all.